All righty. All right, here we go. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I see some people here I've spoken with, but a lot of new names. So let me start out just by introducing myself and explaining a little bit about where I get all of the things I talk about in this workshop. So my name is Leah Paulos. I'm the founder of Press Shop PR and also Book Publicity School. Press Shop has been around since around 2012, although I've been doing book publicity for many years before that under my own name. And we are a team of five. We are based in Brooklyn and we work with authors and publishers in the lead up to publication to line up as much information, as much attention as we can. So we, take a book, think about how to position it, think about the biggest media targets, the most impactful bits of attention that we think we could line up, and then we go to those venues and share the information and try to get as many people interested in the book as possible. So that is what we do at Press Shop PR. We've been doing it for quite a while, as I said, and we've been really lucky to work on a number of really big books. We worked on Tyranny by Tim Snyder. We worked with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We worked on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's last book. And we've worked with a really wide range of publishers, the tons of imprints at all of the big five publishers, with independent presses like Graywolf or Milkweed Editions, and also lots of academic presses. So that is what we do at Press Shop. And basically, all of the everything that we teach, both in this workshop and also all of our book publicity school workshops, are based on that work. So, Book Publicity School is a newer endeavor. We launched that a couple years ago. And basically, the idea is that we saw that there was a real need for authors, a real sort of hole for authors that really want to support their book. They want to give it its best shot. But full hiring a publicist for a full campaign doesn't make sense for them. And we wanted to find a way to support authors there. So that's what we do at Book Publicity School. We do workshops like this. We've got a number of different programs. And it's been really fun. So this workshop today is one that we do every month. It is our 101. And in this workshop, what I always like to do is sort of give a bird's eye view of what a publicity campaign looks like sort of the mechanics of it. We do have worked on close to 350 books at this point. So, it does give us some perspective of, what are the similarities? What does every author need to do? So that's what we do in this workshop. I'm also happy to answer all your questions. I know a lot of you sent in some questions for in advance, so I will get to those, and you can feel free to put in any other questions into the chat, and I'll get to those after a little later in the hour. So what I think, when we look across campaigns and, from the biggest campaigns, the ones that we've worked on that have been bestsellers, or, the authors have been nominated for Pulitzers, down to the other ones, debut authors with a new book with a small press, or an academic title that where the author just sort of wants to break out to a slightly different niche, or wants to break out of their niche to a wider group. When you sort of look at all of those, there are some similarities and some things that are true across campaigns. So there's all sorts of differences, of course. There's, the publisher support. There's, the author's platform, the topic, all of these things. But in terms of the mechanics, two things are really true across every campaign. And I think this is instructive for authors as they think about how to promote their books, which is in this environment really important because publishers, if you are publishing with a traditional press, whether it's, a big one or it's a really small independent or it's an academic press, it varies how much publicity support they can provide. But unless you have a lead title at a big house, for the most part, they just really don't have very much time to promote the book. So it really does fall to authors to do a lot of promotion and be a really active participant in their own publicity campaign. So, this hopefully will help you get a little bit of a framing of what needs to happen. So, when we think of all of those campaigns, the two components that are really present in each campaign are one of them is your pitch, your publicity materials, your press materials, whatever you want to call it. But basically, it is the language that you use to get people interested in your book, especially from a media publicity oriented. So, not specifically to readers, although, there's a lot of overlap, but to media, to event coordinators, to festival bookers. How do you present your book? What is the information that you send? Um, that is something that you have to have a really compelling way of positioning it that makes it timely, makes them want to think like, okay, yeah, this book, I need to write about this book now. This is why it is speaks to the current moment, how it pushes the narrative forward. Um, and it also needs to be short because everybody is totally overwhelmed and their inboxes are insane. So, nobody wants to open up an email and be hit with like 1,500 words of straight text. So that is one element that is true in every campaign. You need to figure out how to position your book really well in a concise way that's really compelling and makes it newsy, timely. And we'll go back to giving you some specific tips there. Then the other component across campaigns is um, the sort of media list. Who are you going to send that to? The outreach list. So you can have these great materials, but then if the people you're sending it to have no power to cover it or have no power to invite you to something, there's no way that they can support the book, doesn't do anything. So that's the other piece. Every book has to have a really targeted list of outreach to people to reach out to. And that is something that in this environment where media is so incredibly fractured, um, it really does need to be compiled and researched specifically for every book. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a moment. But those are sort of the two components that need to be in place for every single campaign. Like I said, if you have the best materials in the world, oh my God, this is the greatest book ever, you don't send it to the right person, nothing happens. If, on the contrary, you have, the right contacts, you've got like all these really perfect reviewers and producers and podcasters and Substackers that might be interested in your book. And then what you send them is, kind of boring or, too focused on, an element that just doesn't move the needle for them, that doesn't feel very urgent, then the same thing, nothing happens. So both of those pieces need to be really well done. So now let's dive in to what a couple tips. I mean, these two components are really a key part of all the workshops that we do at Book Publicity School. So we talk about them, and all of our workshops are sort of based on this idea of like getting those two elements in order. So we have some crash courses that are specifically focused on each of those two elements. And then also our 6 week intensive is sort of created around that concept. So let's dive into the pitch writing. So what I like to sort of I mean, there's obviously there's tons to say here for all of it. I could talk for hours. I do talk for hours about it in our workshops, but I'll just give you a little some tips that I think will be helpful. Um, okay, so the first thing that I would say when you are trying to figure out how to position your book is, and it's can be hard for authors because you're so close to it. You've been living with this book for years or maybe decades, who knows. It's really hard then to get out of your writer head and into promotional head. Um, and it can be really hard to sort of let go of the idea that you need to put it all in there, that you need to have this like comprehensive look at get everything that you cover and like muscle it into this pitch. And also it can be really hard to figure out like what is going to resonate with other people. So the first thing I say is, and you may do this already, but talk about your book a lot to different people that are sort of good target readers. Because what happens is that when you talk to people, that is, it sort of mimics what has to happen when you're reaching out for media. It is your book and the breadth of this book and all the amazingness of it interacting with the real world. So the way that you position it to other people is often very different than what you would say if you just sat there with a Google document and were like, blah, blah, blah about my book. Because right, when you have a face in front of you, you're thinking, all right, what's going to get this person to think like, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. And you also just want to be really aware of responses. So, when you are talking about your book to a lot of people, and maybe you'll sort of start out with like the origin story of how you started writing it, and like pay attention. Are people, maybe that's not working. Like maybe if you notice that one little anecdote that you are sharing, it doesn't really get that much of a response from people, or maybe they're like, okay, yeah, like I'm kind of hungry, should we get sandwiches? Like, okay, and like maybe that's not the most compelling way to put your book forth. On the contrary, if you share something, like a little fact or story or like a way of positioning the book. And every time you do, people respond, oh my God, I'd love to read that. That sounds fascinating. And ask a really good follow-up question. Like, note to self, that might be a good way to position it. So, obviously you need to be discriminating. You don't want to, just because talk to somebody and they don't like something doesn't mean you should scrap the whole thing. So, take it with a grain of salt. And also make sure it's to target readers. Like you don't want to, try talking to it like a 15-year-old boy about it if it's not YA. And if they're bored, you don't want to be like, oh, my book is boring. Like they're not a good audience for your book. So um, so that's one thing. So the other thing in this, once it comes time to actually write a pitch, I always tell authors they don't do it in the same format that you wrote your book. So if you wrote your book in Word, don't just open up another Word document. Don't, same with Google Docs or Scrivener or whatever it is you're using. That just kind of puts you back in author mindset. What you want to do is open an email. And you might, because you want it to sort of mimic, you're talking to a person. When you're writing an email, it is much more a purpose-driven piece of writing. Like you are writing to them for this, so that this hopefully happens. So I always think that's a good idea to write it. And then it's also helpful to just have the person in mind. So say, for example, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in the when I pivot over to the other component, the media list, but like say you in your media research find this podcast that speaks completely like in line with your reader, like the topic or the genre or whatever it is. And you're like, okay, if I could just get this person to engage with my book, I'm really pretty confident that they will be into it and like invite me for an interview or whatever. So think about writing it to that producer. Just like imagine that that person is in front of you. Like what would you say? It is probably going to be different than if you start just analyzing your book and like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Think about what you're saying to them. So that's another, little tip that you can use as you start to write um, your pitch. And then the other thing I would just say is, you really want to be mindful of your subject line. I see all the time people, put a lot of work into this pitch and writing, and, you know, obviously they put a lot of work into their book. And then it comes time to send it, and they're like, okay, like a great book for you, or, just kind of treat that email subject line as an afterthought. Don't put a lot of work into it. Don't do that. I always say that, your subject line might be the eight most important words or seven or nine or whatever it is that you write to promote your book because if you don't get people to open the email, no one's going to see what's inside. And if they don't see what's inside, no one's going to see the book. So do not think of the email subject as an afterthought. Okay, so that's just a little bit. We go way more in depth in that and give samples in our Pitch Perfect crash course about pitch writing. And then we talk a ton about it in our 6 week intensive. Um, okay, so now pivoting over to the other component that is present in all campaigns, so the media list. So, media, I'm sure you guys have all noticed, has changed a lot over the past year, 5 years, 10 years. So when it comes to book coverage, it's completely different than in what it was. It used to be, like when I started out, every publicist had the list of the book editors. There was book editor at all the different newspapers, or dedicated book editors at like NPR and different websites, and you went to them about your book. So now a lot of those review venues have pulled in. Not that many newspapers have standalone book sections anymore. Everyone's attention, as we all know, is fractured. Everyone is getting their news from all over the place. So it makes the job, that has a lot of downsides, obviously, for book promotion, but also a lot of opportunities. But you do need to really get in there in a really granular way to take advantage of the good things and not just be hurt by the bad things. So what I mean is because there are now so few dedicated book editors, those people it's just so unbelievably competitive. Those people are getting hundreds of books from every publisher every week. So it's really hard to get any traction. It's hard to even get them to open your email, or to, rip open a book package, because they are getting so much. So that's sort of the downside. The upside is that there are a lot of opportunities. They just take a little more work, or a lot more work. So, because of the way that everybody can sort of tailor their own, um, feeds and news information, there are pockets where you can tap into people that are like really kind of perfect readers for you. That's much more easily done in some ways now when, say, you have a book like, I don't know, a memoir about, organic gardening and your life moving off the grid or something. Like there's tons of outlets out there for people that like that kind of thing, that are interested in that work, and just find those people and market it to them. So What that means, though, is that you do need to do that work. And what it means for publicists, so like when we at Press Shop are doing a campaign, we do a ton of that kind of work. Um, In-house, you're the in-house publicist at your publisher, they would love to do that work. They are just really, really busy. Like it's not their workload. It's really hard because it was more feasible when there were these set book editors, because then if you have, 6 books or 4 books or 10 books they're handling in a season, okay, you send them to the book editor and, some of those will get picked up. But now that doesn't work so well. And each book really requires its own granular research to find out, like, all right, who are all the people that are talking about this, that are interested, that are, speak to these communities of people who like this topic or this type of writing. And that takes a lot of time. So, what authors can do is they can start doing a little bit of that research themselves. So this is what we teach in our 6 week, of course, but also in our research and Rolodex crash course is how to start doing that for yourself. Because even if you have an in-house publicist, doing that and like getting that research and then giving it to them and say like, hey, I did all of this research. I found these reviewers, these critics, these people that influencers in this space and these podcast producers and this radio show and like would you be able to send a pitch to these people? Like most in-house publicists are going to be really happy to do that. They want to support the book. They just don't have time to dig into the internet for 18 hours for that. So that is something that you can really do. And so, I mean, there's lots of ways to start, but I think one thing that I always suggest for authors at the start of this is to um, think about some comp titles from a publicity point of view. So what I mean by that is titles that books that have come out in the past year or two, maybe 3. It really should be pretty recent for so that because of how quickly everything is changing, you really want to make sure it's pretty recent so you're not pitching places that don't exist anymore. So think about some books that have come out that are have the following characteristics. If they were covered, if the author was interviewed, if the book was reviewed, if they, were invited to this festival, there's a decent chance that they'd be interested in your book too. There are enough similarities that that's a good indication that they might be somebody that would be interested in your book. A great first step is to just find some of those and then put on your, detective hat and just go do some like internet sleuthing and find out how their book launched, like what happened specifically. So it should also, I should say, that you want to pick books that have done well, not, well in that you would be really happy if this was the reception that your book met with. But it should still be reasonable. Like you don't want to pick, Prince Harry's book if you are also not in the royal family, for example. Like it needs to make sense. Um, so you want to come up with, as many of those as you can and just like really map out what was it? What happened? Did they get a feature on in their local paper and then maybe 3 podcasts and like 2 Substacks and then they got, a trade review in Publishers Weekly and then they went to the Boston Book Festival and whatever it is, like map that out for a number of different books. And so that does a number of things for authors. First of all, and one of the things that we hear from so many authors that come to us at Book Publicity School is like they just feel kind of overwhelmed. There's so much to do, but don't really know where to start. There's tons of information online, but like, what do I actually do? What matters? Is this going to move the needle? So doing this as a first step is really helpful because it takes it out of the abstract. It's not just like, oh, well, how this happens and this book kind of took off and like I don't know what to do to get there. Okay, this is how it happened. Like these venues happen, and then you can then put them into your press list and try and find the contacts, etc., and start building your own personal press list from this work. So that's, one thing that you can do just to start building your research list. There's obviously tons and tons to say there as well. Um, but let me stop there for now. I do want to make sure I get to all of your questions. Um, and I'll tell you really quickly, first, just about what we do offer at Book Publicity School. So we've got three different programs at Book Publicity School. We've got a 6-month strategy and support program, and we've got a 6-week intensive, and we've got one-off crash courses. So our crash courses are, they are one-off courses where you get a half an hour one-on-one session with me after you watch our video. So it's like a 75-minute video with me going like doing a deep dive into whichever the topic you choose. So we've got one on pitching, one on media list building, one on building your platform, and one on post-publication promotion. So those are our crash courses. Those are 225 each. And again, after you watch the video, you probably are going to have questions, want to get feedback. Then you get a half hour session with me. And then we also have a 6-week book publicity intensive. We do this quarterly. We run it quarterly. Our next one is the summer session, which starts July 16th. Although you can also take it asynchronously. We've had people take it from Hong Kong and Singapore, and they did not wake up at 2:30 in the morning to listen to me talk. So it is definitely possible to take it on your own time. But our book publicity intensive is really fun. It's a small cohort. We like get to know each other. We go through all of this stuff, all of these things, everything we do in the crash courses, we talk about in the intensive. We talk about working with your in-house publicist, lining up events, festivals, blurbs, a lot about pitch writing, sharing examples of pitches that we've written at Press Shop that have gotten received, coverage on NPR or other things like that. So we cover a lot. That is the next one starts July 16th, and that one is 1350. And then we also work with authors on a 6-month strategy, and that's one where we sort of includes all of the crash courses, all of the intensives, plus a whole bunch of one-on-one sessions with me, with my team. Emma McGlashan's here, the other two publicists that are working at Press Shop. We have one-on-ones where you can, pick our brains. We give you feedback, ideas, etc. And that one is 4,500 for 6 months. So those are our options. We'd love to see you. We're always happy. Anyone, me or anyone on my team are happy to jump on a call if you have any questions. Okay, so let me get to questions now that you guys have sent in or put in the chat. And then I'm happy to take any others that come to you in the meantime. Okay. So let's see, Devin. One question I have, is it acceptable as an author to contact booksellers, shop owners to introduce yourself and your book? If so, what is the most effective time to do so in advance of publication? So yeah, yes, it is. I think when you are going around if you want to go around, if you're in person and it's like your local bookshop, then like absolutely, like just hop in and say like, hey, is your book buyer here or shop owner? It's totally fine to just introduce yourself and let them know about your book. Um, I think that it also sort of depends on, like, you always want to just think about targeting it to the bookstores that make sense for your book and, let them know why, so you want to make sure that you understand the store and their demographic of readers, and make sure it's in line and then make that case to them. Like, that's what when you are reaching out, one of the things I say in all my workshops is like, if you're reaching out to a journalist, you want to think like a journalist. Like, what does a journalist need in this situation? If you are reaching out to like a shop owner or bookseller, like, what do they need? Well, they want to know that either it's a local author that they might be able to support because their community is there, and just a nice literary community thing, or that it's going to be a good book for their bookshop, that they have readers that come by that are going to be interested in it, and that if they put it up there and take some shelf space for this book, that it's going to be a successful thing for them. So I think as long as you're thinking in those terms, it's fine to say hi. If I know, Devin, you said that you are working with Harper One, so you also, can check in with your marketing or publicist, because, see if the sales team there has any thoughts for you on that. But I think in general, that, as long as you keep those parameters in mind, absolutely. Let me see, Kim, do you have any advice for disabled authors who might not be able to do many in-person interviews or talks? Um, yeah, I mean, I think that every campaign has parameters of what makes sense for the author and what doesn't. So, if in-person interviews or talks don't make sense, I mean, in this environment, it's totally fine. We work on plenty of full campaigns where they don't do any in-person interviews. So I guess the question is, if you can do them remotely, if you are able to do remote interviews, that really is not a problem, with the exception of, some of the bigger TV shows like Good Morning America or, Morning Joe, they want you in person. But for the most part, podcast, radio are really accustomed to doing things remotely these days, so that's really not a big problem. Um, and I've had plenty of successful campaigns where authors didn't do talks either. One of the things that is so helpful about um, the way media is now is that you can actually reach a lot of these people sitting on your couch talking on the phone to a podcast. Is such a huge part of publicity campaigns in the past was going around doing a bookstore tour. And in that world, if there were maybe 40 people at each event, it's like, okay, that's a great turnout. This is awesome. Now, since the pandemic, it's harder to get that. And the thing is, though, is that podcasts do reach those people, and you can do it from your home. So even if it's a small podcast that maybe has, like, a really small podcast has like maybe 100 or 200 downloads an episode, like that's a tiny podcast. But that's still 100 or 200 people that are going to hear you about your book, that are like really hyper focused on your angle, or on what you're pitching. So that's what I would say there. Okay, let's see. Hannah, I'm a new publicity marketing person for a small press run out of Carnegie Mellon. Hello. The majority of our list is poetry, which is something I've had a hard time getting press coverage for. Any tips? Yeah. I mean, I think with poetry and with fiction, those can both be challenging, just because it's easier to get coverage for nonfiction. It just is, for a number of reasons. One is that it's easier for a producer who might not be like a really hardcore subject expert, or, be a great reader of all nonfiction. But you can often do a very good interview about nonfiction, no matter what. And it's easier to make it accessible and interesting to the listeners. So I think with poetry and with fiction is that you need to make sure that your pitch materials are, just really story forward, like make it really accessible, make it clear that if somebody books the poet in this case for an interview, that they'll be able to have a really interesting conversation, even if someone doesn't read poetry, even if they're not going to read it. Same with a novel, even if they have it not going to read the novel, you have to show them that there's a really interesting conversation to be had around this work. So, one of the things, and we talk about this in our workshops, of course, is how to put together a really great Q&A to help on that end. We always put together Q&As in our press up PR campaigns to give producers, give reviewers, give other people more to chew on, more ways into the book. So I think with poetry, that can be really helpful as well. Um, okay, let's see, Jane. Book editors and more official media channels want to hear from a PR office, not from individual writers. Is that right? So, yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what kind of media. So, writers should not be, emailing the New York Times book review and being like, "Hey, my book." Like that's not really the way it's done. They want to hear from the publisher or an independent publicist about it. Same goes for, big producers at NPR and things like that. But on places that are sort of new media, Substackers, podcasts, anyone with just an influencer, someone who has a big platform on a social media channel, for those, it's totally fine. That's one of the changes that has can benefit authors is that the sort of standard gatekeepers that used to be more powerful in media, there's just many more options where you don't really need to go through them anymore. For better or worse for society in general, but in this case, it can be helpful. It's perfectly fine for authors to reach out to like a local, like if it's their local paper, say you live in, I don't know, like Milwaukee, and there's a feature writer for the Journal Sentinel, and you've got a really good angle that with a local connection about your book, it's totally fine for you to reach out to that person. You want to do it professionally, and that's a big part of what all of our pitch writing workshops are about. Like, well, what do you say? How do you say it? What's the format? Um, but in that case, it's fine. For the people like the Times and other big venues, then if you are publishing with a traditional house, just tell your publicist like, hey, this person I bet would be really interested. Would you shoot an email to them? Let's see, Jane, for the 6 week intensive, will we get feedback on our pitches? Yes, yes. So for our 6 week intensive, we do a lot of personal feedback. We share samples of pitches that have worked in different genres, different topics, different types of pitches. And then we do look at your pitches, your subject lines, and ideas for media brainstorming and give feedback. We have a online group as well that's part of the 6 week intensive, and so we do that there. Okay, hope. Regarding media lists, are there any certain types of media lists you recommend across all books? Like media from the city the author is from, the alma mater, genre media. Yeah, I mean those three are really great. Basically, and this is one of the things we talk about in research and Rolodex is like figuring out different sort of tabs in a spreadsheet where like, okay, like I'm going to do all the research for media from this, my local city. This is the, uh, alma mater and other communities that I'm part of that I want to alert to my work. So, the ones you mentioned are definitely good. You also, if it's, depending on what the topic, if it's nonfiction, then, top people who just cover the topic. So if it's, just going back to the memoir about going off grid and living on an organic farm, in that case, then maybe it's people who cover sustainable living or, so more topic focused people can be an important category. Um, so yeah, we go really deep into like coming up with lots and lots of different things to um, avenues to reach out to. All right, Diana, can you talk about platform for a minute? Yeah. So, um, I mean, platform, you really want to think about it that, you know, it's all of the different ways that you can reach out to potential readers yourself. So media, publicity, that is reaching out to people through earned media through other people that have their own audiences. But with platform, it's more, you can think about it more as like how can you get your people? Like, what is your direct lines to get information about your book to different groups? So you really want to think broadly because, this in this environment where, again, everything is so fractured, people are all over the place, you want to think about, okay, like your email list, like make sure you build that up. Like those are people that know you. You want to go really, really broad with your email list. Not just like, okay, here are 20 people I want to tell my book is coming out. Like, go bigger. Like, who are the people that like maybe you went to MFA school with or MFA program with? And okay, this was the old neighborhood, or this is like the, you know, people that I was in mom's group with, or whatever it is. Doesn't mean you're going to start emailing them tons and, spamming them. Not suggesting that. But like sending an email about the publication of your book is so standard these days. So really thinking about that. Social media obviously is a part of that. Even if you're not a big social media person and you are not thinking about doing a, really robust social media campaign, but like maybe you have a couple hundred friends on Facebook, you've got some LinkedIn, you don't do it too much. Like in the lead up to publication, like brush those off, do a little bit, maybe add to your group and make sure you post there. So, you just want to think, I mean, there's all sorts of things like that you can do, but you just want to think about all of the different ways that you can reach people. Think about when you figure out what they are, how to expand each of them to get more people, and then think about what you're going to send them that resonates. You might not send the same note to everybody. So making sure that it feels really in line with what they are going to respond to. So that's a little bit about what I would say on platform. Obviously, there's tons more to say. In our platform crash course and also the 6 week. Okay, let's see. What is the timeline for pitching different types of outlets? Print, digital, podcast? Yeah, good question. So I would say that across the board, um, timelines have shrunk because, now you can publish by pressing enter. It's not like you need most places, with the exception of print venues, can publish pretty quickly. So for print, if there is a print version, then those are more in the like, maybe 4 months at least. If it's the print magazines that still exist, then, 6 months is best. But most of the rest of, and that's also true for trades like PW and Kirkus, Library Journal, Shelf Awareness, etc. Um, Most of the venues though that you're reaching out to are in that like couple months before pub, like that's a really sweet spot in, maybe at the 4 months before pub until pub, because all of the outreach that you're doing then is, work. You try to get as much of it to land right around publication. So that's, the best, what I would say is the best for most types of outreach. Again, the ones that are sort of still standing that are the more traditional outlets, those, like the Times, it needs to be like 4 or 5, 6 months in advance. Places like that where they really want to know and they have to slot it in for that month, those venues need extra time. But a lot of the stuff that you can do in this environment is in those months before pub. Okay, let me see here. Okay, we had one more question from before, and then I think that's it. Although I'm happy to take more if you think of them. How important is an author website? Is it okay for me to use my faculty page? No. I would say you need to do a website. Because here is the thing. Your website is, it is the storefront for your work. It is the place. and the only place really online that you can completely control the narrative of your work. You can present your work, your career, your writing exactly the way you want it. You are not relying on like, okay, like what comes up when you Google me, and maybe it's this review that was like, oh, it's fine, but it wasn't that great. Like, but then you had this other great one. Like on your website, you can put the great one up. So, and it's not to see mean that they won't see the other stuff, but like you, a lot of times, if someone's looking up your work and your personal website comes up, that's what they're going to click on. So, that I think, it doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be really expensive. It just needs to be something that you can control, you can update, you can put the best way to position your book. Every time there's like a great review or a blurb or something, you can slap it up there, and you can design it in a way that looks compelling. With a faculty website, it's very hard to fiddle with the design. They're usually pretty text-based and not open to design. Um, so you do want to make sure you do a website. That is part of the material we talk about in the platform course, and the 6-week workshop. And again, it does not need to be crazy expensive. You can Squarespace, Wix are really pretty user-friendly. You can get like maybe you get a designer just to like figure out the look and feel of it, and then you feel like, populate the content, which keeps the price down. So there's a lot of things you can do in that way. But I do always want authors to have a dedicated website where they can think about putting their book forward, and keeping it up to date. And when you do this outreach and you have this coverage or these events, then you have something to lead people back to. Maybe they hear you on a radio show and they're like, huh, that sounds really interesting, I want to hear more. Let me Google them. Okay, here's the website. Oh wow, huh, look, that great review and this blurber said that really makes me want to buy it. Bye. So you want to think of it as a clearinghouse, and like this is what you're putting forward to the world. Okay, so let me see. I think I got through all the questions. If I didn't, feel free to put it into the chat again. Um, and I'm also happy to answer any others if anyone else has a question. I will take the moment to let you think and have a sip of coffee. Okay. Yes, Canva Pro website templates. I've heard that from other people. Those can be really great as well. Um, all right. So thank you guys so much for joining. If you have any questions, you want to talk to anyone on the team about any of our workshops, the details, if it's right for you, feel free to reach out. We're happy to set up a quick call and Tracy advice on a book that has already been released. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say there as well. We do have our post-publication crash course that's all about that. I mean, I guess just in short, I would say is you really want to, figure out new ways to position and keep it in the news, keep it newsy. So whether that's, coming up with talking points, how it relates to the news, or really doing a deep dive into the niche outlets and talks or podcasts. There are always new shows and the new media is just like there's so much churn, there's so much happening. So even if you did some research and then your book came out and you look back 6 months later, there's probably a pretty good chance you're going to find new shows and new people that are interested and have developed an audience that would be a good fit for your readership. So that is what I would say there. Thank you guys so much for coming. Again, happy to answer any questions about any of our workshops. And we also do this 101 once a month. If you have any other questions, you can always feel free to hop in to another one. Thank you so much. Have a great day.